network administration in an era of remote work. I'm Tonya Hall, and joining me is Steve Grobman, Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at McAfee. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Tonya.
Of course. Give our audience a brief summary, if you will, of your professional background and the work that you do.
Sure. So I've been in cybersecurity for 2 decades, focused on many different things. Recently at McAfee as CTO, I lead both our technology development organization, so our tech R&D, our data science research, our threat intelligence research, where we track bad actors around the world and look for vulnerabilities. But I also have our internal IT and internal security teams working for me. So we are defending our organization against all the same threats that our customers do.
So while COVID-19 pushes workers from the corporate office to the home office, working from home is a trend that's likely to continue long after the pandemic has passed. So what are your enterprise customers telling you about the challenge of quickly ramping work from home up to scale?
So a lot of our enterprise customers have had to think about how do they manage their enterprise with a different type of configuration. So number one, if you look at the types of applications a lot of people are using in 2020, they're cloud-based, which in many ways is very good in that a cloud provider is actually running the vast majority of the service. So for things like productivity, using O365 works really well without all of the complexity of needing to have everybody VPN back into the company environment. Now, if we were having this pandemic a decade ago, it would be all about how do you get the remote workers into your corporate environment? Whereas now we have the opportunity to have many workers just go directly to their applications run by the cloud providers. But that sets up a whole bunch of new challenges. One of the things that we can never forget is all of that network traffic is going over an untrusted network. It's called the internet.
How will the transition to remote work affect the enterprise network administrator's role?
So the network administrator is needing to think about different things. They are thinking about how do they manage a network that they don't actually control, largely the internet. So instead of necessarily thinking about how do I control the physical networks within their organization, both their local area networks or the wide area networks, they're needing to make sure that the end users can stay safe and not put their organization at risk when they're working at home over the internet. And what that means is they're needing to rely on a different set of technologies. So what organizations have had to do is look at what can they do to make sure that users are safe when using the cloud. And it means that they're now looking at things like web gateways. So they're looking at how do you use a web gateway or a SaaS offered web gateway where every web connection is both inspected for threat intelligence. Is it going someplace that's safe? Also looking at, can they restrict what information leaves their organization, what we call data loss prevention or DLP, but then also being able to inspect traffic as it's coming back to the device, looking for things like malicious content or malware. And all of that is happening over this new virtual edge. So we need to think about it as the way we're framing what the network is has fundamentally changed. The network isn't just about the networks within your organization. The networks is all the networks you're using to get your job done. And in many cases, that's the internet.
So what changes in network security should we expect to see moving forward from a technology and a human behavior perspective?
So there's a few things. One of them is because you're now connecting to all of these applications over an untrusted network, there is inherently some new risks. We recognize that there's new risks of things like credential theft, your password being stolen, which is why we're strongly recommending every organization use multi-factor authentication. That would be when you log into an application, it's not only your password, something you know, but also something you have, either the key fob or there's applications that run on your smartphone, or you might get a text message out of band. This makes it such that if a cyber criminal steals your password, they can't actually use it because they don't have that second factor authentication. So that's one of the things that's very important for network administrators to push in their organization as they shift from working in the office where you have trusted networks to working in remote locations where you're potentially accessing things from many, many different remote locations.
So, how will data backup processes change?
So it's a great question because the data is now inherently more decentralized. So in the good old days where everybody's in the office on high speed networks that are all trusted, you can have a comprehensive data backup strategy where you're even doing things like backing up local devices. I think we're moving to an era where the cloud is largely the backup solution. So we need to envision devices themselves in some way as disposable. If a user's local device fails, the critical data for the organization is going to be mirrored to the cloud. The cloud is going to be responsible for the backup. The other side of that, though, is there's going to be applications in traditional data centers, traditional on-prem environments for a long time. And we can't forget that network administrators, application administrators still need safe and secure ways to access those applications, which is why the other part of this equation is not just the workers themselves, but how do we actually enable the administrators to have secure connectivity back into the back ends of their organizations to do administration securely.
Will there ever come a day when organizations ask whether they need a corporate network at all? And if so, how soon?
We're not going to get rid of the corporate network for a long time, but it is going to be very industry and vertical specific. And you can imagine some verticals that there's going to be an internal network forever, a hospital, a healthcare. You're going to have equipment like an MRI machine, patient monitoring equipment that is essential to actually keeping people alive. Those networks aren't going to magically go to the cloud. We're always going to need those. For other types of organizations that are much more generic application focused, the cloud is the future. And we see everything moving to the cloud very quickly unless there's that need for specialized physical equipment. So for some organizations, they might be able to get off their traditional networks, but there's going to be a lot of networks for a long time. And even for organizations that can go to the cloud, they'll need to triage which applications go first. And unfortunately, we'll have lots of legacy to deal with for many, many years.
Those are some good points, Steve. So, what suggestions can you offer to network admins to help them make the transition to secure and reliable remote employee support?
So there's two things they need to think about. Number one, how do general employees get secure access to the applications and capabilities they need? That requires having secure devices, using multi-factor authentication, and including security architecture that actually works in a remote environment like web gateways, web SaaS, unified cloud edge environments. The other part is making sure that the administrators themselves can get secure access to manage the internal networks that still provide a critical function. That means they need to use certificate-based authentication for things like RDP, remote desktop protocol, utilize multi-factor authentication for their administrative tasks, and ensure that they're constantly using the principles of what we call least privilege. Essentially, everybody in the organization should only have access to the minimal set of things that they need to get their job done. If they do that, they'll be able to have a good, clean, secure environment.
Steve Grobman, Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at McAfee. Thanks for joining us. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to follow you on social media, how can they do that?
Sure, they can either direct message me or follow me on Twitter, and it's at Steve Grobman.
Sounds good. And find more of my interviews right here or go to tonyahall.net. Thanks for watching.